trained speaker by any means, so whatever part I gaff, just forgive me. I'm going to start off with this quote. I don't know where it came from, but I think it's very true. There's a deep connection between the cattleman and his cattle. I know I have a deep connection between my cattle and my son said the other day on the Hereford tour, he said, there's one thing about Dad that we all know is important. It's God, grandchildren, and cattle, and we don't know what order that is. There's a deep vested love of the animals and the land that few people understand, and people don't understand how connected we are to our cattle and to the land and how much we put into that. That's me and my dad in 1993.
Is that Linebred bigger?
Must be. It's not a very clear picture there, but anyway, we are a lot different. I have a brother that's about the same height as my dad, probably weighs 140 pounds. And I was my highest, a little over 6'5", almost 6'6", and at my highest 290. I'm back down to 250, and it isn't that you get littler, you just kind of squat out. You know, the manure pile just kind of runs out. This is, you saw a better picture you had of Dr. Jan Bonsma, and this is, I have. This is taken off of a poor photo, but that's Dr. Jan Bonsma, and I first saw him demonstrate in 1966 at Kansas State University. He lectured that morning in Umberger Hall, and I don't think people fully understood what he was saying. He talked broken. But they took him over to Weber Hall, and they brought cows in front of him that he'd never seen before in his life. And he told them how many calves they'd had, how old they were, if she'd ever had an abortion. Without exception, he was right. And the students thought, well, we'll mess him up once. We'll run a cow in front of him. Have a little difference. They run a cow in front of him that had a set of twins once in her life. And he told them how many lactations she'd had, and he said, she's had more calves than that. And their jaws just dropped. I don't suppose to be able to do 1/10 of what Dr. Bonsma did. Don't understand it nearly as well as him. I have followed his principles for 42 years, I guess. And I've found them to work. They work for me, that's for sure. I had a guy that was at the last Bonsma get-together we had, and he said he didn't see it, but his dad did. Dr. Bonsma did a 10-stop tour in 1966 in the United States, and he was at Cal Polytechnic Institute, and this guy said his dad was there, and there was a woman in the crowd, and she started heckling him. She said, "You can't know all that about those cows." She said, "They've given you the figures, how many calves she's had and all that. You can't know all that." He said, "Ma'am, do you mind coming up here?" This guy said he didn't see it, but his dad told him this. She came up and he said, "Take your coat off, would you, ma'am?" She took her coat off. He told her within 2 years how old she was and how many children she'd had. She went and sat down and never heckled him again. I don't have that ability, don't pretend to have that ability. But he was a genius. Ron talked about it a little bit, but to breed for optimum means to have a target in sight beyond which you don't want to go. If you've got your cow herd weaning calves at 550 or 600 pounds and you think that's what your environment can master, and you don't want to get bigger than that, don't select for higher than that. If it's your goal to maintain an optimum level for any trait, the evidence of your accomplishment is not visible by change, but by lack of it. We keep thinking we have to maximum, maximum, maximum. Maximum growth, maximum everything. It's maximum profit, optimum for your environment. Your environment might be different than mine. I know your environment is different than mine. I was out at Richard and Susie Snidden's a year ago in California. And their environment is definitely different than mine. I can go 15 miles down the road and find a customer and his environment is different than mine because of his feeding practices, the way he handles his cattle. You have to pick cattle that will work in your environment and your function there. That's why we can't all agree as we talk on one kind. There's a different kind that will produce, but there are some things that Mr. Bonsma talked about that are critical in all environments. And we'll try to hit on some of those. This is a picture out of Dr. Bonsma's books. It shows all the hormonal effect that takes place in a cow. We think of hormonal effect as coming from the ovary. Yes, we do have hormonal effect coming from the ovary. We have estrogen and androgen. But there's also the cortex of the adrenal gland, the islets of the Langerhorn, the thalamus, the thyroid, posterior and, can't say the other word, anterior and posterior of the pituitary gland, and all of these work in synchronization. In nature, they have to be synchronized. When I went to college, I didn't know what synergistic meant. That was a word that I had never been introduced to until I took an animal breeding class under my instructor was Dr. Farmer. And he was kind of a rough old bird, but that was one thing he talked about constantly. Synergism. Synergism. God created synergistic environment. God created synergistic hormones in animals. Until man started screwing with it, we screw up the synergism. We make things antagonistic to each other. He talked constantly about synergism. And that's what Dr. Bonsma talks about. These hormones that happen from all of these glands work together synergistically, and they make a cow look like a cow looks. They make a bull look like a bull looks. I remember him saying, one of his quotes was, if you select your grand champion steer today, and tomorrow you select your grand champion bull and your grand champion heifer to look like that grand champion steer, they will probably produce offspring at about the same rate as that steer does. Because they don't have hormones. Steer doesn't have hormones. You cut the testicles out of him. He lost his testosterone. You upset the balance. It's not synergistic. And today, how many times do you go to the show and the grand champion heifer looks like the grand champion steer? Oftentimes. Grand champion bull looks like the grand champion steer. Oftentimes. They shouldn't. They shouldn't at all. I was at Cortez, Colorado, I don't know, several years ago, giving a talk, and we went out in there. They had thousands of cattle, and they could only gather a few, and they gathered a few up in the pen and wanted me to pick out a cow that would be functional and a cow that wouldn't be functional. And I picked out cows basically like this being the functional cow here. They were crossbred cows, but this was a functional and that was a non-functional. The young lady that was riding the horse gathered them up. She said, oh my, it's not what I was taught. She said, we ought to pick them like this. This is lots of meat and mass. She's the functional. wasn't to her for what she wanted. Well, that cow hasn't had calves for about 6 years. This cow had a calf every year. There are some things that Dr. Bonsma talked about that we'll get into in later pictures, but he always talked about a ewe-neck cow being a fertile cow. See how this shoulder point is very high and her neck comes down and up? That's because this shoulder blade is rotating high. And that shoulder blade rotating high, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but the spinal processes don't grow tall in between that shoulder blades because hormones have shut off long bone growth. Estrogen shuts off long bone growth in the front end of the cow first and then in the back end of the cow last. In the male, it's the opposite. Testosterone shuts off long bone growth in the rear of the bull and last in the front of the bull. Now, I don't mean to offend you ladies, so excuse me, but if you have 8 men standing in a church pew, what's touching? Their shoulders. If you have 8 ladies standing in a church pew, what's touching? Their hips. Same theory. Hormones control that in a functionally efficient animal. This is he called this the beef type animal and this the more the milk type animal. The fertile cow has ribs that slope slightly backwards. The unfertile cow slopes more around. When I took EMT class, I was taught if you'll find a man down and you want to know whether he's breathing or not, just looking at him, he's a belly breather. His belly's going up and down. If you find a woman, she's a chest breather. Why would women have to be chest breathers instead of belly breathers? How about pregnancy? They have to be chest breathers. And by this formation of their ribs, which estrogen causes, they have 2 expansions in their ribs. Right here, it's outward and upward. They have 2 expansions. Dr. Bonsma said it didn't matter whether you had a 50-gallon drum or whether you had a 30-gallon drum. The one that could expand the most is the one that took the most air in. So sometimes we've heard people talk about the heart girth has to be bigger around than the length of the animal, or I don't know how they said it exactly. I don't think that's a maternal thing. That's a terminal selection. Maternal, they are not as big around through the chest because their ribs slope backwards. And you'll find your fertile cows, if you go home, you'll find your fertile cows, their ribs will slope backwards. Maybe you can't see it when they're really fat, but if they get a little thin and milk down, you can definitely see their ribs sloping backwards. They have this kind of shape down here too, and that's a fertile cow. That over there being the terminal type animal, not being nearly as fertile. Again, over-exaggeration, but a Jersey cow. One on top that hasn't had a calf, one below that had a calf every year. Look at how she's wedge-shaped, rear to front. Look how her shoulder blade is rotating high here, and look how her shoulder blade is rotating low. This unfertile cow, the vertebrae in between her shoulder blade have grown tall. That makes these shoulder blades rotate low. I've personally witnessed some heifers that years ago I thought, you know, man, they're really good. They're really thick. Got a lot of thickness in the back end of them. I thought they were pretty good. They weren't fertile. They might have one calf. They might not have any calf, but they weren't fertile. We got to have fertility to make this thing work. Can't make a profit if she has a calf every 18 months or every 2 years. Can't make a profit. You got to have it every year. This is a little different look at that. This is again Dr. Bonsma's pictures. This is the unfertile cow here. This is the vertebrae that have grown taller, and the shoulder rotates lower. And here he puts meat on it, and here he puts the skin on it. This is a fertile cow, rotating very high, rotates high here. Look how that shoulder blade rotates high there. Look at the difference in femininity of these two. I'll come to this point again in a little bit, but fertile cow has, this is her brisket, and I call a little pleat around that brisket. See what I'm talking about? Just a little pleat. Very important. That's fertility. Cow that has that little pleat around her brisket is showing her fertility. This cow, that's just a crease, that's not a pleat. She's full of fat, she's not fertile. Again, right here, she's full of fat. But it's very important to look for that high shoulder rotation, that pleat, and as I showed you just a little bit ago, the rib formation. This is a fertile cow over here. She's lean, calm, and alert. No fat on the cheeks. This cow over here's got fat. She's got coarse hair on her head. This cow here has got very feminine hair. She's feminine all the way through. She's slick-haired. Ron alluded to that. Cows have to slick off. First cows that slick off in the spring are probably your first cows to be bred. If they don't slick off, they're probably the cows that aren't bred. If you've got cows that don't slick off in good hot weather, beware. I hear people say, oh, them cows in Canada, they got a lot of hair on them because they got to keep warm. Hey, my cows have seen 25 below zero and they're pretty slick haired in the wintertime. They don't have to have long hair to keep warm. They have to have rumen capacity to keep warm. So they create the heat in their rumens through fermentation. That's what keeps them warm. They don't have a big rumen on them and a lot of rumen capacity. They can't keep warm. Yes?
If you circle around that fat on the cheek of the one on the right-hand side.
Right there. That's the fatty part. And this guy here is lean. Look at the femininity, and that's masculinity there. Well enough? This is going to the other end of the cow. You know, a show ring likes to make cattle just as square as they can make them, just like that. Well, you go out and look at deer, elk, antelope, buffalo, you name it. Every one of them has some slope from there. I don't have a picture of hooks to pins, I don't think, here. Have to have some slope from here to here. Hooks to pins. Have to have some slope in that area. That makes the pelvis in the animal stand straight up and down in nature. That's why deer, elk, and antelope have some slope from hooks to pins, because survival of the fittest makes the pelvis stand straight up and down in there when it's got some slope, hooks to pins. But man thinks he needs to pull these pin bones up to make them square and level. Show ring demands that, square and level. I always say that man has tried to improve on what God created, and the only thing he's proven is that God was right. We don't improve much on God's creation. Going back to that slide before that, this is the same size pelvis. You can measure both of these pelvises, go in externally, go inside and measure these pelvises. They'll both measure the same, but because the one is tilted upward, this pelvis here loses that much usable space. It's kind of like taking a basketball goal and putting it up against the backboard. You know what I'm saying? You take the backboard here and you tilt it up towards the backboard. It's a lot harder to get a ball through that basketball goal when it's working against the backboard. It's a lot harder to get the calf through a pelvis that's tilted upward, with the backbone being the force above. So you lose all that usable space that you have right here. Here's the usable one, here's the unusable one. You lose all that space, even though you measured your pelvises. And it said that, oh yeah, she's going to be an easy caver. But she's so flat in her rump, she can't use what you measured. This cow is 479. She's basis of my cow herd. That's a poor picture, but very grainy. That's her at 17 years of age. She wasn't any longer perfect uddered by any means, but not too bad for 17. She produced till she was 19 years old. Look at the pleat around this brisket. She's got a good big pleat right there at 17 years old. Look at her wedge shape. She's got lots of volume, but she's still wedge shaped, rear to front. Her shoulder blade rotates very high. You can barely see it in this grainy picture, but her shoulder blade rotates very high up here. She's slick-haired. You can't see that in that picture, but she's a slick-haired cow. I bought that cow when she's 12 years old. When I came home from that sale, my dad said, oh my gosh, you bought a 12-year-old cow? What did you give for her? And I never did tell my dad what I gave her. I paid this is in the 80s, I paid $2,750 for a 12-year-old cow. Best investment I ever made. Except for my 3 kids, my grandkids. She's the basis of our cow herd today. I would be hard-pressed to go in our cow herd and find something that doesn't go back to her. Somehow, through the many sons we've used, daughters, granddaughters, great-granddaughters, we moved away. She was born in April 10th, 1964. I can tell you the exact day she's born, on my dad's birthday.
How old was she when she left the herd?
19. Because of Bonsma traits that I saw in her when she was a 12-year-old cow. She had those traits, and I really liked what she had done. Was never a 110 indexing type of cow. I don't find that real high indexing cows in your herd are the ones that stay. It's the 100 to 104 maybe cows that stay in your herd and stay for a long time. They're a lot more productive. They stay there until they're old cows, producing at 104 than they are if they're gone by the time they're 5-year-olds and they indexed 115 on a couple calves. I find that almost constantly, that the really high indexing cows won't stay in the program. But it's a lot more important for longevity.
Was more her form than her pedigree?
Yeah, her pedigree had something to do with it too. Because 569, I really didn't know I was line breeding the 569 when I bought her though, but she is a 569 daughter. And I didn't know I was going to be line breeding the 569 until later, because all the good cows that I found happened to go to 569, so I thought, well, maybe I ought to line breed that. And I now have cattle that go to 569 over 400 times, and he's a very line-bred bull himself. And we're over 40% inbred on some of our cows and approaching toward 40% on most of our cows, inbreeding coefficients. So you'll see some of the cows tomorrow. Hopefully it isn't raining so you can't see them, but you'll see some highly inbred cows, and it's the 569. And you'd think that I'm selecting terminally by always going to 560. I'm not. I'm selecting maternally because those cows went to 569 and they worked. I use the example for longevity. If you have 100 head of cows and your average age in your cow herd is 5 years old, and you're all going to say, oh no, mine's a lot older than that. And I'm going to say, wait a minute, you got lots of 2-year-olds out there. It's going to pull your average down pretty fast. You got a lot of 3-year-olds out there. You ain't got many 10, 12, 13-year-old cows. all them 2s and 3s are going to pull your average age back. And you would be hard pressed to find many herds that are more than 5 or 6 year old average age of the cow herd. But let's say you had a cow herd that was 5 years old and you wanted to maintain that 100 head cow herd. She had a calf that she's 2, 3, 4, and 5, so she had 4 calves. So that means you have to replace 25% or 25 heifers every year to keep a 100 head cow herd going. Understand where I'm coming from? Let's increase that longevity to 6 years old with the same productivity. Then she produces 5 calves. You've only got to keep 20 heifers to keep that 100 head cow herd going. Selection, they tell you generation turnover is the way to improve in your faster selection for traits. I say it's those last 5 heifers. Instead of keeping 25, I could cull off the last 5 that I was going to keep. I don't have to keep those heifers. I made greater genetic progress by keeping the top 20 instead of the top 25. That to me is greater genetic explosion for me. Plus, think of the productivity. You've got 5 more heifers you can sell. You don't have to feed 5 heifers for a whole year to get her up to having a calf. Most expensive thing we do is raise heifers. She's dry that whole year, she doesn't produce anything for you. Most expensive thing you do is raise heifers up. And if you've got to raise 20 of them versus 25 of them, I'll guarantee you which guy's going to make the most money.
Say something about that switch on that cow. It just looks like it's confusing.
Well, fertile cows have a good long switch, plus they have a very narrow tail. Their tail will not be very big around. That's estrogen. Yeah. And on a bull you will see big long hair on his penis. It's going to be big long hair growing there. And he's also going to have a narrow tail if he's really fertile. You can just about bet on that too. Bonsma taught that too. Thank you.
What was the calving interval on this cow?
Oh, I can't tell you, that's so long ago, but she never missed one. I know that. I couldn't tell you the exact day or whatever, but she never missed one in 19 years. She got flushed once in between, but she never missed a calf in 19 years. I saw
The year she flushed, was she able to the next year back up to be in sync with everybody else?
she was 1 month late.
That year, but then the next year she catch up again?
She didn't have a chance. That's when she was 19.
Oh.
I go to my embryologist, but we do very little embryo work, but he always said, well, I back up, dump a cow off, and he said, Gene, why can't you bring me a young cow? Because I'll take him a 14 or 15-year-old cow. And he said, man, what are you doing? I said, I don't know if she's any good because she's 14 or 15 years old. Then I know she's good. She's lived through all those things, just like one in Pennsylvania. He was here last time we had a Bonsma field day. He didn't know that cow was any good until she got 12 years old or more. The Hereford breed has a lot of things that a lot of people don't. You know, I hate to admit it, but we've got the reputation that's well deserved. Cancer eye, prolapse, and no milk. Bad udders. That's what the Hereford breed is known for. You go to the sale bar and sit down and you ask somebody what the Hereford breed's known for, that's what they're known for. Cancer eye, prolapse, no milk, and bad udders. I started in line ones because they were line-bred cattle is where I went. They were line-bred cattle and they had the lethals all out, but they didn't have those 4 traits out. They had not selected against those 4 traits. That's why I've had that line breed so tight all these years. We have not eliminated cancer eye. We have greatly reduced the incidence of it. I will say we have eliminated prolapse. Had a gentleman come, Art Schuneman. He's now out of the business, but Art came to my place, and I told him before he came that we'd eliminated prolapse. I bought a cow from, well, I won't say from who, but anyway, she was out of a cow family I wanted something out of, and I bought this cow and I brought her home, and we went and drove up to the cows. They were real close to calving, and Art was riding in the front with me, and Darius, wherever he is here, he was sitting in the back seat, and there that cow was with a big old bulb sticking out like that, and I was so embarrassed. I said, Art, I told you we'd eliminated that. He said, you know, I believe you, Gene, because when we drove up here, your son said, what is that, Dad? He'd never seen one. So Darius proved the point, but it embarrassed me, it really did. But I paid $5,000 for that cow. I didn't keep that cow and put her in the program, because the first mistake is I bought her. The second mistake would have been greater, and that would have been putting her back in the herd. If you're line breeding, you have to select even harder than if you're outcrossing. Or you don't make, so many people think line breeding and inbreeding, you make bad genetics show up. Or create bad genetics, I should say. You create bad genetics and you make awful things show up. That is not true. All you do is show what is there. You increase the bad things, it would be prolapse or cancer eye or whatever, you increase that so many times in the gene pool that it's going to show up. That's how you purify a line. Is you line breed it and you line breed it and you line breed it and you cull ruthlessly. The tighter you line breed, the harder you have to cull. I know one gentleman said, I've got my cows so line bred I don't have to do any selection. Hey, folks, the more you line breed, the harder you got to cull, because you are intensifying the bad as well as the good. Ron said something about purebred breeders ought to be line breeding. I honestly believe that it's a purebreeder's duty to line breed his cattle, to eliminate things so he doesn't hand them on to the commercial customer. Plus, when I sell my line bred animal to you who has an unrelated, even in the same breed or in and out cross to some other breed, you get hybrid vigor within the breed, a greater hybrid vigor when you outcross to a different breed. Now, that's a hard sell, I'll tell you that. To sell that to somebody that comes to your place and your bulls aren't near as big and don't have the performance that somebody else does, it's a hard sell. You agree with that, won't you, Chris? Chris knows what I'm talking about. He's line breeding tight. It's a hard sell. But if you sell that idea to someone and they take your genetics out and use it in their herd, oftentimes they're lifetime customers, because they see the difference that happens. I've got customers out here that have seen that from our genetics, both Hereford and Angus. I got to move on, or I'm going to run way over here. Another cow, 219. Look at the shoulder rotation on that cow. You can really see it on her. Look at the wedge shape. Tremendous volume in this cow, but she's still wedge shaped, rear to front. Can't see it as well here, but she's got a pleat around there. See that little pleat right there? Comes clear around there. This cow I didn't know until she was probably a 12-year-old. She'd been in production in Texas for years. This is a 3-year-old, one of our raising, 176. She's produced more dollars of cattle for us than any cow we've ever had on the place. She has slope from hooks to pins. Look at the high shoulder rotation. Look at that pleat around the brisket. Look at the milk vein on this cow. Tremendous milk vein. I talked about the ribs sloping backwards. You can't really see on her, but they do. She's wedge shaped from front to rear. She's got that U-neck. Talking about that wedge shape and getting more air into the lungs because of 2 rotations of the ribs instead of 1. Dr. Bonsma's book, Bonsma Lectures, estimates that it takes approximately 200 gallons of air through the system to produce 1 gallon of milk. So that cow has to take in tremendous amounts of air to produce milk because she has to have it for rumination. She has to have it for run the milk through that milk vein. But he says 200, he said up to 250 gallons of blood have to go through this vein to make 1 gallon of milk. I said that wrong, not 250 gallon air. 250 gallon of blood has to go through that milk vein to make a gallon of milk. I misquoted, sorry about that. This cow, she's a little bit higher set in the tail than I would call perfect, but she does have a little slope from hooks to pins. She has been embryoed a number of times, which would have changed that. She still has a high shoulder rotation. See the little pleat around here? Her ribs do slope backwards. Very functional, fertile cow. Real good picture of a cow, what she should look like. She's in range condition. Shoulder, tremendously high rotation. This is a 218 cow. Her ribs slope backwards. She's walking uphill there, but she's still wedge shaped from rear to front, even though she's walking uphill. She has a pleat around that brisket. Look at the milk vein on that cow. She's got good slope from hooks to pins. Very productive cow. This is her mother, 959. I would say that's about an 8-year-old picture of that cow. Milk vein, high rotation, pleat around the brisket. She's a little bit flat here for me if I was going to make her, but she does have some slope from hooks to pins, but I would like to change that a little bit on her. Very productive cow for us. 143, you'll see 2 daughters of her tomorrow out of a bull that was born in 1975. She's got the pleat around her brisket. Tremendous volume cow, but her ribs slope backwards. Her shoulders are very high. As soon as you see that depression of the neck, you know their shoulders are high. If you see a cow with her head down and you're looking right straight on at her, you'll see them shoulder blades pop clear up there and make a groove down her line. She's got some good slope from hooks to pins. Very productive cow. This is a cow that, very famous cow, 95. I owned a part of her. She's been flushed a lot, so I can't say that flushing them changes them. But this cow is pretty flat right here. Not a lot of slope. I'd like to put some slope there. She's not as angular through the ribs as I'd like to see her. The shoulder is at least level, but it's not higher. But part of that might be due to being flushed. I'm sure she was. She was flushed a lot. She does have a pleat around her brisket yet. But she's very famous. You're seeing Hereford after Hereford. This is a poor picture. I just grabbed it out of the journal. This is what a lot of people think a cow ought to look like. That cow has about everything I can name on with her. Where's the slope from here to here? Very, very flat, if not uphill. Where's her shoulder? It's way down here. Where's her pleat? It ain't there. Very boxy made. She looks like a show steer would look at that age. Another cow I took out of a journal, and somebody thought she was awful good female. They wouldn't have put her in. She's a young cow. What's wrong with her? Wedge shaped the right way? She's wedge shaped the wrong way. She's smaller back here than she is up here. That's hormones that cause that to happen in that female. She didn't stop growing up here because of estrogen.
Gene?
Yeah.
I would say that backwards. It's lack of hormones.
Yeah,
That caused her to turn out that way.
yeah, that's what it is. What did I say?
It was hormones that caused it. It was the lack of.
Yeah, it was a lack of estrogen that caused that to be.
Sorry.
Yeah. I'm sorry if I misspoke. Here we're going to the bulls now. This is what Dr. Bonsma said was a fertile bull. He's massive fronted, massive crest. He's darker up front, darker around the lower part of the body, and he's darker back here on his rear hind quarter too. Hair. This is a bull with a little ear, but the sheath is hair on him you can't really see, but he would have had long hair. His tail is not real big around either. This picture doesn't indicate that. This is I remember in the 1980s there were some show bulls that came through that looked about like this when they got thin. They were frame, but they didn't have the hormones.
Gene, you outlined that triangle back there, like where it was back here on the back, on the lower one, on the lower one.
Well, right here.
Yeah. See how low that triangle goes?
Yeah.
It tells you how straight up and down the straight goes.
That's right, and it also shows how lack of rooming capacity he has. He has no rooming capacity because this is hollow. Otherwise, the rumen would fill it up like it has this bull. But you're right. But the ribs should go straight around the bull. More though than the sow than a heifer. This is the fertile bull on this side, big testicles. We've got some bulge here. You get behind the bull, only thing you should really see is his rumen sticking out there. Got a lot of rumen capacity, but he's thick. See how narrow this tail is down here? This bull has no masculinity here. Testicles are small. These are Dr. Bonsma's pictures. This is an example of two identical twin bull calves. This one was left the bull. This one was castrated before he reached puberty. These bulls were measured up to 19 years of age, and this steer grew in long bone growth up until 19 years of age. He never quit. This one shut off long bone growth because he had testosterone. Why they made eunuchs in the Bible? They castrated them. They grew huge. They didn't quit growing because they didn't have any testosterone to make them quit growing. That's why they did it in the slaves here in the U.S. too. They castrated the males. But people thought they did it you're going to make them behave. They won't bother the gals. But no, it was to make them grow huge. They got to be monstrous. If you went to State Fair years ago, they had a 3,800 pound or 4,000 pound steer under the tent, and you go pay to see him. It wasn't a bull, it was a steer. Because he never quit growing, because he didn't have testosterone to shut off long bone growth. Cut before they reached puberty. I had a St. Bernard dog, Brutus. My kids remember Brutus well. Brutus got huge. I mean, literally, salesmen would drive in my yard, and that dog would look straight into the window. We didn't have trouble with salesmen, but he grew huge. He was castrated before puberty. He never quit growing. Yeah.
So, probably why most of the implants are used in feedlot or like estrogen, so the cow gets a little bigger.
Yeah.
That's,
I think that is correct. I'm not scientifically knowledgeable enough for that, but I think that is correct. Isn't it? This is a bull I line breed to. Island Domino 569, he's born in 1961. Not a huge frame by any means. You can see his shoulder rotation is high here. Need a high shoulder rotation on a bull also. He's not huge, he's walking downhill a little bit. You won't see another picture of this bull because there aren't any. I never seen a picture of this bull, didn't know anything about him, and I was line breeding to him. And Lyle Newman, who had the bull, was a professor emeritus at Georgia or Georgia State, something like that. And I found out about him, and I wrote him a letter, and he sent me back several pictures of 569. The first time I'd ever seen him, and the first time anybody else can recollect seeing the old bull. He's the one I line breed to, and the reason I line breed to him is because his daughters were so good. This is a 444. He has 569. His great-great-grandsire 3 times. In the next generation, another time. He's got 569 4 times in the first 4 generations. There isn't anything but 569 in this bull. He's dark colored here. Look at the crest on the bull. The shoulder rotates high. Look at the dark coloration coming around here and here. And something that I find, and I don't find in Dr. Bonsma's lectures at all, or any of the books, but I have found that the bulls that have these little speckles on them seem to be the really fertile bulls. That's just an observation of mine. I have no scientific proof, but it's been an observation of mine through the years that the bulls that have that little speckle on seem to be really fertile bulls. And I find that in Angus and Hereford. Yeah. It's easier. The coloration is a lot easier to see in Hereford than it is in Angus. This dark color that I'm talking about here is a lot easier to see in the Hereford than it is in Angus. But this is hormones causing this to be like this. He was intensely line bred 569. This is his grandsire, 430. We called him Black Eyes. He had black around both of his eyes. Look at his massive frontedness. Look at his shoulder rotation. Functionally correct and efficient. He, at 13 years old, was still in production in the commercial herd in Nebraska. I had used him. I sold him to a registered herd in Oklahoma. He sold him to a registered herd in Nebraska. They thought they were done with him at about 10 years old, and they sold him to a commercial man. And I talked to the commercial guy, and he said, at 13 years old, the horse has a hell of a time keeping up with him. He was that functionally efficient. Yes, sir.
In that last picture, you had the same spot. Is that also true in cows also? Or
No, I've just noticed it in bulls. Yeah, I've just noticed it in bulls, and I don't know why. I just have noticed it. Okay. This is that bull 430 as a calf. Lots of people think you need if you're going to have a bull massive fronted, he's got to be massive fronted as a calf. No, if he's massive fronted as a calf, he's going to quit. Yeah.
Those speckles, but
You want me to go back to
no,
that?
we're good. See this right here, this little line along
Yeah.
there? He's got a lot of glandular function going on at 6 months of age, and it turned into those speckles. It was so good. I mean, I never heard this before, but I'm seeing glandular function at 6 months of age there with what's going on here.
Well, Steve will talk a little bit more about glandular function and the finer points in a little bit about that. This bull is not massive fronted at this age. If they're massive fronted at this age, they're too quick. They're going to mature too quick. He develops that as he's a 2-year-old and beyond that they develop that massive fronted. You don't want it in a calf. This is the bull we just looked at there. That's 430 as a mature bull, and that's 430 as a calf. This is a bull you'll see tomorrow, 1122. He's a bull that this spring you go out, he's slick haired, he's got dark all the way around. His sheath hair has been clipped off because of semen checking, but he had long sheath hair. His shoulders rotate high. You'll see him tomorrow. He'll be the sire of almost all the calves you see tomorrow. That is a 8-year-old bull this year. He's 8. Oops. C405, massive fronted bull, cleat around his brisket. He's still got a lot of thickness back here, but look at where the mass is at, in the front quarter, not the rear. 714, look at the coloration of that bull. Doesn't come around into here as much. He's got a good cleat here, got a shoulder high rotation. Chris, you know something about 714? He owned him. This is 334 at 15 years of age. He was still natural servicing cows at 15 years of age. That's in the wintertime, obviously, with a lot of hair on him. And that was in the state of Washington. He's a 569 son. That's 609. He's 569 son. He's 9 years old there. That bull, I bought him when he was 15. And he serviced cows naturally at 17 years of age. I'll be honest with you, at 16 years of age, he was out in the pasture. At 17 years of age, I had to bring the cows to him. But he naturally serviced them at 17 years old. That's the oldest bull I've ever had on the plate. Tremendous set of females, corrected udders like no other bull I ever used. He's a 569 son.
Did you collect that bull?
Yes.
The second thing, I think
I collected him at 15. Yeah, but he naturally serviced at 17. I still have some semen of that bull. And he'd be the sire of a lot of the bulls I've been, sire and grandsire and great-grandsire, a lot of the bulls I showed you. That's ultimately what we're after. Black baldy cow. Look at the shoulder rotation. She's got a big pleat around here, black hair. You can't see it quite as good. She's got a big milk vein running right here. If I was to change her, I'd probably make that a more perfect udder. I know I would make that a more perfect udder. She's got good slope from hook to pin to the slope. Tail head might be just a little high, but good slope. Shoulder rotation is very high. That's what we're ultimately after, is that kind of black baldy cow to function and produce for us. This is Lyman Domino 569's pedigree, and then we're talking about line breeding. He was born in 1961. He traces to the original 2 bulls at Miles City, Advanced Domino the 20th and Advanced Domino the 54th, who were half brothers. They were out of Advanced Domino the 13th. He traces to them that many times. You can see the 20th and the 54th. He is a line-bred bull. Plus, he started with the same cow here and the same cow here. And I've got cattle that go to 400 times to that. That's what you call line breeding. Most people would say that's crazy inbreeding. But that's what we call line breeding. I'm going to touch on line breeding just a little bit. I guess I already have. The reasons we do it are, I'm crazy enough to try it, and believe me, it's not the most economical way to go in the industry. I had to pay my dues. I have no idea how many cow families I started out with to get down to 6 that I have now that I know I can line breed and nothing's going to happen. I've got 6 cow families that I know I can line breed and get down. So, you know, it isn't economically the most advantageous thing to do, but it's been the most rewarding to me of all things that I can do. With that, I'll close mine off.